You are sitting in a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Your friend is telling you a story about her weekend. Something ordinary, something light. You nod, you smile, you say the right things at the right moments. But you are not entirely present in the conversation because your attention has already split into 17 different streams of awareness, each one demanding to be heard. You hear the espresso machine hissing at the counter, a sound like compressed steam escaping through metal. You notice the barista's eyes are red, the way she touches her phone between orders and looks at the screen too long, the way her hand trembles slightly when she wipes down the chrome surface. You see the couple 3 tables away, their bodies angled just slightly too far apart, their voices kept deliberately low, the woman's fingers tapping against her cup in a rhythm that suggests impatience or anxiety or both. You feel the flicker of the overhead light, a pulse so subtle most people would never register it, but to you it is like a heartbeat, irregular, distracting, impossible to ignore. Your friend is still talking. You force yourself back to her face, to the movement of her lips. But then you catch the smell of burnt coffee beans mixing with someone's perfume, too sweet, almost nauseating. And you notice the man by the window has been staring at his laptop screen without blinking for 2 full minutes. And the door opens and closes and brings with it a gust of cold air that carries the scent of rain, even though the sky is clear, and you realize you have no idea what your friend just said. You are not rude. You are not distracted. You are drowning in data. This is what it means to live with a brain that has no filter, no gate, no ability to decide what matters and what does not, while other people experience the world in standard definition. You exist in 8,000 pixels of clarity, every detail sharp, every sensation turned up to maximum volume. You do not choose this. You cannot turn it off. It is simply the way your nervous system interprets reality, like a radar dish pointed at the entire universe, receiving every signal, every frequency, every whisper of information that floats through the air. People tell you that you are too sensitive, that you overthink everything, that you see problems where none exist. They do not understand that you are not inventing these observations. You are simply unable to ignore them. Your brain processes the world the way a military surveillance system processes a battlefield, cataloging every movement, every anomaly, every potential threat or meaning, and it does this without your permission, without rest, without mercy. This is the psychology of hyper-awareness, the experience of seeing everything, hearing everything, feeling everything, all at once, all the time. It is a gift that feels like a curse, a superpower without an off switch. And the question that haunts you late at night when the world finally goes quiet is this: why do I notice what everyone else ignores? And how do I survive in a reality that is too loud, too bright, too much? There is a name for what you are. Not a diagnosis, not a disorder, but a description. You are a human seismograph. You detect tremors before the earthquake arrives. You feel the fault lines in a relationship weeks before the rupture becomes visible to anyone else. You know your boss is angry before he opens his mouth, before his expression changes, simply because the air around him has shifted, because his breathing pattern has altered by half a second, because he stood up from his desk with slightly more force than usual. You read rooms the way scholars read ancient texts. Every gesture is a word. Every silence is a sentence. Every micro-expression that flashes across someone's face for 1/10 of a second is a paragraph of meaning that you absorb and analyze and store away for later reference. You do not do this consciously. You do not sit there and think, I will now study this person's body language. It happens automatically, the way your lungs breathe, the way your heart beats, a continuous process of pattern recognition that your brain executes without asking for permission. And this is where the suffering begins, because when you see this much, you cannot help but think this much. One unanswered text message becomes 10 different scenarios playing out in your mind simultaneously. She is upset with you. She is busy. She has lost her phone. She is deliberately ignoring you. She is in danger. She is simply forgotten. She is ending the friendship slowly, quietly, without confrontation. Each possibility branches into more possibilities, and within minutes, you have constructed an entire decision tree of potential realities, and you are exhausted before you have even moved from your chair. Someone looks away when you speak, just a fraction of a second too quickly, and your mind registers it as evidence. Of what, you are not sure yet. Boredom, dishonesty, discomfort, disinterest. You catalog the moment, cross-reference it with other observations, search for patterns, build theories. You do not want to do this. You do not enjoy being suspicious. But your brain is a detective that never clocks out, never takes a vacation, never stops gathering clues from a crime scene that might not even exist. People accuse you of being paranoid, of creating drama, of reading too much into things. But they do not understand the fundamental difference between you and them. They experience the world through a filter that removes 90% of incoming information, allowing them to focus on what seems immediately relevant. You experience the world raw, unfiltered, every piece of data arriving with equal weight and urgency. The hum of the refrigerator is as loud as the voice of the person speaking to you. The flickering street lamp outside demands the same attention as the conversation happening in front of you. Nothing is background noise. Everything is foreground. This is not madness. This is not some paranoid delusion or character flaw or failure of emotional regulation. This is a nervous system processing an enormous volume of sensory and social information that most people never even receive. When you feel overwhelmed, when you need to leave the party early, when you cannot handle one more stimulus, one more sound, one more conversation, you are not being weak or antisocial or dramatic. You are experiencing the biological reality of a brain that has exceeded its processing capacity, like a computer asked to run 1,000 programs at once. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not too much. You are simply operating with different hardware, running different software, perceiving a different version of reality than the people around you. And the exhaustion you feel, the constant fatigue that settles into your bones, is not laziness. It is the natural result of living every single day at maximum cognitive load, your awareness turned up to volumes that would overwhelm most people within hours. There is a mechanism in the human brain called latent inhibition. It is a filter, a cognitive process that allows most people to ignore familiar stimuli so they can focus on what is new or important. When you walk into your apartment, you do not notice the hum of the air conditioner, the texture of the carpet beneath your feet, the particular quality of light coming through the window, because your brain has marked these sensations as irrelevant. They are background. They are known. They do not require your attention. This filtering process happens automatically, billions of times per day, protecting you from sensory overload by deciding what deserves consciousness and what can be safely ignored. But you do not have this protection. Your latent inhibition is low, sometimes absent entirely. Every time you enter a room, even a room you have entered 1,000 times before, your brain processes it as if you are seeing it for the first time. The air conditioner is not background noise. It is a distinct auditory event that your nervous system registers and analyzes. The carpet is not just floor covering. It is a tactile experience with specific texture and temperature that your sensory cortex maps in detail. The light is not simply illumination. It is a complex interplay of wavelength and shadow and movement that your visual system tracks with the precision of a physicist measuring radiation. You treat all information, familiar or novel, as equally important. Your brain does not distinguish between signal and noise, because to your nervous system, nothing is noise. Everything is signal. Everything matters. Everything could be meaningful. This is the neurological signature of creative genius. The pattern seen in artists and inventors and scientists who make connections others miss, who see possibilities in the mundane, who revolutionize fields by noticing what everyone else has learned to ignore. But it is also, when taken to its extreme without the mediating influence of other factors, the signature of schizophrenia, of a mind so overwhelmed by input that it can no longer distinguish between internal and external reality, between pattern and coincidence, between meaning and chaos. You exist somewhere on this spectrum. Your low latent inhibition gives you creative insight, the ability to connect disparate ideas, to see solutions that require thinking beyond conventional categories. But it also means you cannot turn off the flood of information. You cannot decide that something does not matter. Your brain insists that everything might matter, and so everything must be attended to, considered, filed away for potential future reference. And if you grew up in an environment where safety was never guaranteed, where the mood of a parent could shift without warning, where violence or chaos or emotional volatility was the background radiation of your childhood, then your hyper-awareness has a second source, a second engine driving it forward. This is trauma-induced hypervigilance, the survival mechanism that develops when a developing nervous system learns that the world is dangerous and that your survival depends on your ability to detect threats before they fully materialize. You learn to read your father's footsteps on the stairs, to distinguish between the heavy tread of a normal day and the slightly sharper impact that meant he had been drinking. You learn to measure the silence between your parents' words, to feel the electrical charge building in the air before an argument erupted. You learn to become invisible at the right moments, to anticipate anger, to scan faces for micro-expressions that would tell you whether it was safe to speak or safer to disappear. These were not choices. These were adaptations. Your brain rewired itself to prioritize threat detection above all other functions, because in your world, missing a signal could mean emotional annihilation or physical harm. And now, decades later, even though the immediate danger has passed, even though you live in relative safety, your nervous system still operates on that original programming. You still scan every room for exits. You still monitor the emotional temperature of every interaction. You still notice the smallest shift in tone, the briefest flicker of irritation, the microscopic changes in body language that signal someone's internal state has shifted from positive to neutral to negative. You cannot help it. Your amygdala, the ancient alarm system buried deep in your brain, has been sensitized by years of genuine threat, and it no longer distinguishes between a true emergency and a social discomfort. Everything activates the same warning system. Everything feels potentially dangerous. But there is more to your experience than trauma and low latent inhibition. There is also a baseline difference in how your nervous system is constructed, a biological variation that some researchers call sensory processing sensitivity. Approximately 20% of humans, along with similar percentages in other species, possess nervous systems that process information more deeply and thoroughly than the majority. This is not pathology. This is biological diversity, an evolutionary strategy that ensures some members of a population are attuned to subtleties others miss. In your brain, the thalamus, which acts as a gatekeeper for sensory information, filtering what reaches your cortex for conscious processing, opens its gates wider than average. More stimuli pass through. More sensations reach awareness. The same sound that barely registers for someone else arrives in your consciousness with full clarity and detail. The same visual scene that others process as a simple gestalt, you experience as a collection of individual elements, each demanding attention. You cannot dim the brightness. You cannot lower the volume. Your sensory world is simply louder, brighter, more intense than the world most people inhabit. This is why crowded spaces exhaust you within minutes, why shopping malls with their fluorescent lights and competing music tracks and rivers of human movement feel like assault courses for your nervous system, why you need silence and darkness to recover, why a day of social interaction leaves you depleted in ways that seem disproportionate to the actual events. You are not weak. You are processing 10 times the data, and that processing requires energy, cognitive resources, neural activity that burns through your reserves at an accelerated rate. And then there is your pattern recognition, the way your mind moves through information, not linearly, but in great intuitive leaps, connecting A to Z, while others are still contemplating B. You see systems where others see isolated events. You perceive trajectories, consequences, implications that have not yet manifested in observable reality. When someone tells you about a new relationship, you do not just hear the story they are telling. You see the dynamics beneath the story, the attachment patterns, the unspoken needs, the incompatibilities that will surface in 6 months or a year. You do not want to be pessimistic. You are not trying to ruin their happiness. You simply cannot unsee what you see, cannot unknow what your pattern-matching brain has already computed. This makes you valuable in certain contexts. You are the person who catches the error in the contract that everyone else missed. The designer who notices the flaw in the system before it fails. The friend who knows something is wrong before anyone has said a word. But it also makes you lonely because your conclusions often arrive too quickly for others to follow. You have already seen the ending while everyone else is still enjoying the opening act. You have already calculated the outcome while they are still debating the variables. And when you try to explain your reasoning, it sounds like speculation or pessimism or paranoia because you have skipped so many steps that seem obvious to you but are invisible to them. So you learn to stay quiet. You learn to watch the story unfold exactly as you predicted, to witness the slow-motion collapse you saw coming from miles away. And you do not say, "I told you so," because that would be cruel, but inside, in the private space of your own consciousness, you feel the particular exhaustion of Cassandra, cursed to see the truth, and powerless to make anyone believe it. Your hyper-awareness is not one thing, but a constellation of factors. Low latent inhibition, trauma-based hypervigilance, high sensory processing sensitivity, exceptional pattern recognition. Each of these alone would be enough to set you apart. Combined, they create an experience of consciousness that is fundamentally different from the norm, a way of being in the world that is simultaneously gifted and burdened, both superpower and disability, depending on the context, the moment, the degree to which you have learned to manage the flood. But what if the problem is not that you see too much, but that the world has forgotten how to value what you see? What if your hyper-awareness is not a malfunction, but a different kind of precision, a higher resolution of reality that most people have traded away for the comfort of ignorance? Consider what would be lost if no one possessed your particular way of perceiving. Who would notice the hairline fracture in the bridge before it becomes a catastrophic failure? Who would read the biopsy slide and catch the single abnormal cell that everyone else dismissed as statistical noise? Who would look at the financial statements and see the pattern of fraud hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions? Who would sit across from the teenager insisting everything is fine and perceive the depression they are working so hard to conceal? Who would create the art that captures emotional truths so specific that people weep in recognition, finally seeing their inner experience reflected back to them? The world needs people who notice, who cannot look away, who process reality at a depth that reveals what is actually happening beneath the surface, performances everyone else accepts as truth. You are not the high-definition version of humanity by accident. You are the correction for a species that has become dangerously numb, that has mistaken the ability to ignore suffering for emotional health, that has confused the capacity to overlook injustice with professional success. Every great detective, every skilled therapist, every investigative journalist, every emergency room physician who saves lives through early intervention, every quality control engineer, every film director who captures human nature with devastating accuracy, operates with some version of your hyper-awareness. They have learned to channel the flood of data toward productive ends. They have transformed the curse into craft, the burden into vocation. What overwhelms you in a coffee shop becomes, in the right context, the ability to read an MRI scan, to identify the crucial detail in a crime scene, to understand what a patient cannot articulate, to see the story no one else recognizes. And beneath the practical applications, there is something even more fundamental. You possess a quality that the world claims to value but actually fears: genuine empathy. Not the performance of empathy, not the social script of saying, "that must be hard," while thinking about your own problems, but the actual ability to feel the emotional reality of another person, to perceive their pain even when they hide it behind smiles and reassurances, to know when someone is suffering even when they have not said a word. You are the friend people call at 3 a.m. when the crisis can no longer be contained, because somehow you already knew something was wrong. You noticed the change in their text messages 2 weeks ago, the subtle shift in their voice last Tuesday, the way they laughed slightly too hard at something that was not funny. You have been watching the structure deteriorate while everyone else saw only the intact facade, and when the collapse finally comes, you are not surprised. You are simply present, bearing witness, offering the wordless understanding that comes from having seen the truth all along. This is not a small thing. In a culture that demands constant performance, constant positivity, constant denial of difficulty, you are one of the few people capable of seeing through the performance to the human being underneath. You make people feel known in a way they have never experienced before, recognized at a level most relationships never reach. This is why people trust you with their secrets, why they confess things to you they have told no one else. They sense, even if they cannot articulate it, that you already see them fully, that there is no point in hiding, and that your seeing is not judgment, but recognition. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not too sensitive or too intense or too much. You are the portion of humanity that retained the capacity to feel everything, to notice everything, to remain permeable to the full spectrum of existence. In an anesthetized world, you are awake. In a culture of distraction, you are focused. In an age of superficiality, you perceive depth. This comes at tremendous cost, yes. The exhaustion is real. The overwhelm is real. The loneliness of seeing what others cannot see is profoundly real. But so is the gift. So is the possibility that your particular way of being in the world, your specific configuration of sensitivity and awareness, is exactly what allows certain crucial things to be noticed, certain truths to be spoken, certain beauty to be created, certain suffering to be witnessed and validated and held. But knowing you are not broken does not stop the overwhelm. Understanding the gift does not silence the noise. You still wake up every morning to a world that is too loud, too bright, too demanding, and your nervous system still processes every sensation at maximum intensity, whether you want it to or not. So, the question becomes not whether your hyper-awareness is valuable, but how you survive it, how you create a life that does not constantly deplete you, how you find the off switch for a radar system that has no off switch. The answer begins with a concept that sounds almost absurdly simple: sensory diet. Just as your body needs specific nutrients in specific quantities to function, your nervous system needs a carefully calibrated balance of stimulation and rest. Most people can tolerate chaotic environments because their sensory gates filter out the majority of input. You cannot, which means you must actively control what enters your awareness, must design your life around the recognition that your capacity for stimulation is finite and precious and easily exceeded. This starts with physical tools. Noise-canceling headphones become not a luxury, but a medical device, a way to create silence in a world that offers none naturally. Sunglasses protect you not just from brightness, but from the visual chaos of reflected light and movement, and the thousand small details your eyes will track if given the opportunity. You choose clothing based not on fashion, but on texture, on softness, on the absence of tags and seams and synthetic materials that irritate skin. Your brain cannot stop monitoring. These are not indulgences. These are accommodations for a nervous system built differently, adaptations that allow you to move through the world without constant assault, and you create sanctuary. One room, one corner, one space in your living environment that is designed for sensory minimalism, low light or no light, silence or carefully chosen sound that soothes rather than stimulates, temperature controlled, comfortable, a place where your nervous system can finally stop scanning for threats, stop processing data, stop working. You spend 30 minutes here every day, minimum, not doing anything, not being productive, simply allowing your brain to rest. This is not laziness. This is essential maintenance, the equivalent of letting an overheated engine cool down before it seizes completely. But managing physical input is only half the equation. You must also learn to manage the stories your mind creates from the data it collects. Because hyper-awareness combined with anxiety produces a particular kind of suffering, you notice something small, something genuinely real, and then your mind extrapolates that observation into catastrophic narratives that may have no basis in fact. Your friend responds to your text 3 hours later than usual. You notice this. That noticing is accurate, but then your mind builds an entire architecture of meaning. She is angry with you, she is distancing herself. The friendship is ending. You have done something wrong. You are being abandoned. None of this is necessarily true, but your pattern recognition system, operating without restraint, treats it as an inevitable conclusion rather than one possible interpretation among many. This is where reality testing becomes critical. When you notice something and your mind begins constructing its explanation, you pause. You ask a simple question. Is this truth or is this fear? Am I observing facts or am I projecting anxiety onto ambiguous data? And when possible, you ask the other person directly. You say, I noticed you seemed distant today. Is everything okay? You give them the opportunity to provide actual information rather than leaving your mind to fill the vacuum with speculation. Most of the time, the answer is mundane. She was busy, he was tired, they were distracted by something completely unrelated to you. The micro-expression you caught was not rejection, but indigestion. The change in tone was not anger, but exhaustion. Your observation was accurate. Your interpretation was catastrophically wrong. And learning to separate observation from interpretation, to hold your conclusions lightly rather than treating them as established fact, is perhaps the most important skill you can develop. When the overwhelm comes anyway, when your mind has spun too far into speculation or your senses have absorbed too much stimulation, you need a way to return to your body, to the present moment, to what is actually happening right now rather than what might happen or what you fear is happening. The grounding technique is simple. You find 5 things you can see, naming them silently or aloud. 4 things you can touch, feeling their texture, their temperature, their solidity. 3 things you can hear, listening without interpretation. 2 things you can smell. 1 thing you can taste. This forces your attention out of your racing thoughts and into immediate physical reality. It interrupts the spiral. It reminds your nervous system that right now, in this specific moment, you are safe. And then there is perhaps the strangest practice, the one that sounds like magical thinking, but contains a profound psychological truth. You learn to distinguish between your emotions and the emotions of others. Because your hyper-awareness extends not just to physical stimuli, but to the emotional states of people around you, you often absorb feelings that do not belong to you. You walk into a room and suddenly feel anxious, but the anxiety is not yours. It is radiating from your coworker who just received bad news. You sit down for dinner and feel inexplicably sad, but the sadness belongs to your partner who is processing grief they have not mentioned. Your permeable boundaries, your sensitivity to emotional atmospheres, means you become a container for feelings that originated elsewhere. So, when emotion arises without clear cause, you pause and ask, is this mine? Does this feeling have a source in my own life, my own thoughts, my own circumstances? Or did I pick this up from someone else, absorbing it the way a sponge absorbs water? And if it is not yours, you practice giving it back. Not literally, not in some confrontational way, but internally. You imagine the emotion as an object, and you visualize placing it outside yourself, returning it to wherever it came from. You are a witness to the suffering of others, yes. You are sensitive to their emotional reality, yes. But you are not required to carry it. You are not a repository for pain that does not belong to you. This is the discipline of hyper-awareness, not eliminating the sensitivity, which is impossible, but managing it, creating structures and practices and boundaries that allow you to exist in the world without being destroyed by it. Learning to protect yourself, not through numbness, but through conscious choice about what you attend to and what you release. There is a lighthouse on the edge of a cliff, far from any town, surrounded by dark water and darker sky. Inside, a keeper watches. He sees ships when they are still hours from shore, just pinpricks of light on the horizon that no one else would notice. He sees storms gathering in the distance, reads the patterns in the clouds, knows when the wind will shift and the waves will rise. He sees everything the ocean does, every change in current, every variation in the tide. It is lonely work, solitary work. He cannot leave his post, he cannot stop watching. Because lives depend on his vigilance, on his ability to see what others cannot. You are that lighthouse keeper. You stand at the edge of human experience, perceiving things before they arrive, noticing dangers and beauties that others will not register until much later, if at all. You see the ships in distress. You see the storms coming. You see the safe harbors and the hidden rocks. And yes, it is exhausting. Yes, it is isolating. Yes, there are moments when you wish you could be like everyone else, safe in the town, oblivious to the vastness and danger of the ocean, able to sleep through the night without watching. But the watching matters. The seeing matters. You have prevented shipwrecks that never happened because you sent out the warning in time. You have guided people to safety through fog they did not even know surrounded them. You have been the light in the darkness for those who were lost and did not know how to ask for help. Your hyper-awareness, your relentless noticing, your inability to look away has served purposes you may never fully understand, has touched lives in ways that leave no visible trace but change everything nonetheless. You do not need to fix everything you see. You do not need to solve every problem you perceive. You do not need to carry the weight of all the suffering and beauty and complexity that your awareness reveals to you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do, the kindest thing you can offer yourself, is to turn off the lighthouse for a few hours, to trust that the ocean will manage without your constant vigilance, to rest in darkness and silence and allow the world to hold itself for a moment while you simply breathe. Your eyes see what others miss, both the fractures and the grace, both the pain and the possibility. That is your burden and your gift, inseparable, inevitable, But you are allowed to close those eyes sometimes. You are allowed to stop watching. The world will still be there when you return, and so will the light you carry, ready to shine again when you have gathered the strength to keep it burning.